was one of the first, man. The scout walks alone. It's the loneliest walk of all, and that's why it's respected, and that's why it's hardest. I didn't know this until I met my Indian teachers. That's why the scout's knife is sharp on both edges. This is the scout's knife because it cuts your life to go out into the world of the enemy and see what they are and who they are and how they live and how they operate, and to experience the belly of the beast. You got to bring back a good scouting report. You got to do it with honor. But once you get to the belly of the beast, you have to make your way back to the light.
It was a symbolic act more than a murderous act. The World Trade Center is a symbol, an icon, a representation, not just of the port of New York and New Jersey, or of Lower Manhattan, or of Wall Street, but indeed of the capitalist system, and by extension, all of America.
New York got $90 million worth of land that would eventually be... The cranes would raise a structure unlike any in the world. Before the buildings would be finished, more radical construction and engineering methods would forever change how skyscrapers were built. Construction of the Twin Towers began in August 1968. Architect Minoru Yamasaki would move away from conventional techniques with a completely different type of skeleton.
The common sense way of understanding the construction of a skyscraper, we think back to our childhood as building it like an erector set. It was a symbolic act more than a murderous act. The World Trade Center is a symbol, an icon, a representation, not just of the port of New York and New Jersey, or of Lower Manhattan, or of Wall Street, but indeed of the capitalist system, and by extension, all of America. It was a symbolic act more than a murderous act. The World Trade Center is a symbol, an icon, a representation, not just of the port of New York and New Jersey, or of Lower Manhattan, or of Wall Street, but indeed of the capitalist system, and by extension, all of America. You have little pieces of steel which you hold together with rivets and grommets, and it's like building a cage. This is the normal way of building a steel skyscraper. It's a cage-like construction. You have vertical members and horizontal members, and you build little boxes, and you pile box upon box upon box, and thus you have a skyscraper. Yamasaki wanted something different.
What he decided on was a revolutionary way of constructing high-rises, the exterior skeleton system.
What Yamasaki came up with, in conjunction with structural engineers, is to make the skin of the building much stronger so that you wouldn't need internal columns.
Ever since the 19th century, skyscrapers have been built with a network of interior supporting columns. Their exterior walls were merely curtain walls that admitted light and kept out the rain. Loads and have the strength to resist the enormous force of lateral winds as well. High-strength steel that had not been available before made this possible.
A good analogy, I think, to explain it is the World Trade Center towers are like stalks of celery. The rigidity comes from the outside, not from the inside, and this also accounts for their unique appearance.
The building was designed to have a fully loaded 707 crash into it. That was the largest plane at the time. I believe that the building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners because this structure is like the mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting. It really does nothing to the screen netting.
To achieve this kind of strength, engineers conduct two comprehensive tests. The first was a boundary layer wind tunnel test. Scale models of the World Trade Center, along with a large section of the city, were put into a wind tunnel. Planners spent hours doing mathematical stress calculations of various wind effects on the building.
With the World Trade Center was the first time that for a high-rise building that comprehensive boundary layer wind tunnel studies had been performed. And previous to this, people had studied the effects of wind for aeronautical projects, for use in cars, designing cars, but for buildings that had not been used.
30 years later, that type of testing is standard practice in the structural engineering industry.
Airlines Boeing 737-800 was left with a bend in its beak after a bird strike. Luckily for the 125 passengers on board, flying from Istanbul to Nevşehir, the plane landed safely. Damage to the nose area of an airplane is common in most aeronautical impacts, but not fatal to the plane. Birds can strike the nose, wings, or hull without posing a risk to the plane and its passengers. But bird strikes to the engine area are more critical, as the U.S. Airways Flight 1549
the United States government actually did carry out on our citizens experiments involving radiation. In one scientist injected plutonium into 18 patients without their knowledge. In another, doctors exposed indigent cancer patients to excessive doses of radiation, a treatment from which it is virtually impossible that they could ever benefit.
All of these pioneering ideas created a complex that was structurally sound and incredibly efficient. Its strength and its very existence would be most severely tested not by high winds or a jet airplane, but by an unforeseen and appalling act. On February 26, 1993, a horrific act of international terrorism struck the United States. In an attempt to bring down the Twin Towers, Islamic terrorists called the Fifth Liberation Army planted a bomb equivalent to 2,200 pounds of TNT in the parking garage of the second-floor basement of Tower 1 at the World Trade Center. At 12:18 p.m., a huge explosion left 6 people dead and more than 1,000 injured.
It was just a day that you don't forget. I wasn't injured at all in the bombing. I just was hit by a falling ceiling tile, and I guess it wasn't my time. I was about 150 feet from ground zero. I took the elevators down to the B2 level, was walking down the hallway that day, and I just entered the door to my office, and the bomb went off. All I remember is a tremendous loud sound and a blast of wind going behind me, and the secretary that was walking with me that day, and she was heading down the hall to the carpenter's office, both of her legs were broken by this blast of wind. She wasn't hit by anything other than the blast force. Then, within about a half a second, my mind had realized that it was a bomb, and that's what I yelled to everyone in the office: "It's a bomb, get out."
The massive explosion ripped through the basement floor, creating a hole 100 feet wide, 4 stories deep, a tomb of crumpled cars, concrete, and twisted steel. However, the apocalyptic devastation hoped for by the terrorists did not come to pass.
There was much damage caused by the explosion, but it was all in the surrounding area and very little inside of the footprint of the building, despite the fact that the bomb was placed immediately adjacent to it.
Fortunately, the World Trade Center had been constructed to withstand hurricane winds of up to 150 miles per hour. The energy impact from those winds far exceeds the impact from the bombing. While the bomb was similar to the one that completely destroyed the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, the steel vertical columns of the World Trade Center did not flinch.
Bloody mess on plane. A bird strike crushed the nose of a passenger plane as it was coming in for a landing at Heathrow Airport last Friday. The Egypt Air Boeing 737-800 was carrying more than 70 passengers when it collided with the bird, leaving the radome cone covered in a...
An analogy that one might put to that is if you take a firecracker and you put the firecracker on the ground and you put a can over it. Anyone who's done that realizes that the can goes shooting up in the air and the ground doesn't move. Well, the building was analogous to the ground. It didn't really move. That wall was very strong relative to anything else around, and so the force of the explosion, the shock wave, basically hit that surface and reflected.
All that it caused was a crack in one of the support columns that you could stick a dollar bill through on one side. The other 3 sides of the column remained intact, and the loads just transferred to all the other structural steel in the complex.
What concerned engineers most was the bathtub-like 7-story basement of the Trade Center complex that keeps out the waters of New York Harbor. The horizontal basement floors that formed the lateral support for the bathtubs had been destroyed. The loss of the basement floors meant that the support of the bathtub walls was in question.
Were U.S. government officials aware of drug smuggling in and around the Contra movement? And did they simply choose to ignore it? One U.S. senator says, absolutely.
There's no question in my mind there is a complicity in the flow of drugs into this country, period.
Any questions? This public service announcement was brought to you by the Friends of the Department of Homeland Security, the Information Awareness Office, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the President's Working Group on Financial Matters, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Rhodes Roundtable Group, and the Bohemian Club. And remember, ignorance is strength. Shut up, conspiracy theorist.
The entire wind load is carried to these columns. New York's weather forecast presented an even greater sense of urgency.
There was concern, particularly since there was a windstorm predicted for the following week, that some of these columns might in fact get some additional load due to the windstorm and would buckle. Columns can be like rulers. If you push on them enough, they'll just buckle out to the side at a given point.
Within 36 hours, the damaged structural column and remaining columns were given solid additional bracing. Cleaning the extensive debris was another priority.
It was a massive, almost like a Normandy or D-Day. The cleanup operation was on a heroic scale. The engineering reconstruction was on a heroic scale.
Working round the clock, an army of engineers, maintenance people, and construction workers removed over 6,000 tons of debris. Final cleanup and repair costs reached more than $500 million. 20 days after the blast, the World Trade Center reopened its doors. The first tenant to move back into his office was New York Governor Mario Cuomo.
It's clean, it's comfortable, don't worry about it.
New emergency communications were installed at key locations, and increased security for truck deliveries and pickups were implemented. Tenants and visitors conducting business at the World Trade Center now wear electronic identification badges, and access to the basement parking lots is restricted to tenants only.
There was a loss of life. Some of my friends were killed in this incident. But it shows the tremendous resiliency and strength of these two towers, that such a significant event resulted in what was amazingly not that much property damage, and what could have been a real tragedy, only 6 people were killed here, rather than the tens of thousands that the terrorists wanted to kill.
It was a symbolic act more than a murderous act. The World Trade Center is a symbol, an icon, a representation, not just of the port of New York and New Jersey, or of Lower Manhattan or of Wall Street, but indeed of the capitalist system, and by extension, all of America.
A person, a group, a movement, an institution, a nation, etc. So this law essentially funds U.S. propaganda. But isn't that illegal? It was. But no, not anymore, because 3 years ago, wrapped inside the 2013 NDAA, was an amendment that removed the ban on the U.S. government creating propaganda and then showing it to U.S. citizens. That ban, by the way, had been in place since 1948. The 2013 amendment struck down a ban on domestic dissemination of propaganda material produced by the State Department and the Independent Broadcasting Board of Governors. It neutralized the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948 and the Foreign Relations Authorization Act in 1987 that had been passed to protect U.S. audiences from our own government's misinformation campaigns. And in 2013, when that bill was passed, most media said, oh, don't worry, the U.S. government will never actually create propaganda. Well, now they've created a mechanism to fund it. So what you need to know is that politicians claiming we need to fund U.S. government propaganda to protect the public from the Russians and from the Chinese. But there's a reason it was illegal for over 60 years for our government to propagandize the public, to protect the public from our own government. Reality check. Right now, 2 out of every 3 Americans in the latest polls say they have little to no trust in mainstream American media, because 2/3 of Americans already believe that they're not getting the truth. That number will likely only get worse with the legalized American government propaganda.
I spent the last 2 hours putting the burial arrangements for my daughter's funeral, who's 14. President Trump, please do something. Do something! Action! We need it now! These kids need safety now!
There is speculation the Russians may be fueling the conspiracy theory to spread discord in America.
The intelligence community has been very clear that Russia continues to try to exploit divisions in the U.S. and try to turn us against one another.
My father is a retired FBI agent. I'm not working with him or anybody else on this. I'm speaking from my heart. I was a witness to this. I'm not a crisis actor. I'm not a crisis actor.
I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago.
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
If there is any conference which required transparency, which required democratic accountability, it is the Bilderberg Conference.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th.
But of course, in any political system, there are sort of over-the-table and under-the-table arrangements.
Now more than ever before, the World Trade Center could be seen as a symbol of New York's strength and resilience.
Great engineering projects like this become another way of our continuing to tell a story about who and what we are. You know, that's one of the ways that civilization reproduces itself. And sometimes we have to write these things out real big and then look at all the small stuff that goes into it.
It wouldn't resurface again for more than a decade, and only then under the aegis of urban renewal and the influence of one of New York's most famous heirs, David Rockefeller, grandson of Standard Oil founder and billionaire John D. Rockefeller. In 1958, Rockefeller spearheaded what was called the $1 billion plan to stimulate business and revitalize Lower Manhattan.
His vision was to spend $1 billion of private and public monies to create a kind of gleaming futuropolis. The core of this thing is going to be this great public purpose, a World Trade Center that will secure the future of New York City's port forever. So they said, well, here's all this stuff we can demolish over on the east side. This, by the way, is where the South Street Seaport is today. All the preserved buildings are today. But at that point, it was considered fair game. Like the 19th century buildings, knock them down.
It should also be pointed out that David Rockefeller's brother was Nelson Rockefeller, who was the governor of New York. So this is very helpful in pushing the project through. In fact, some people have said that the Twin Towers should be renamed David and Nelson.
To fund and build the new project, David Rockefeller and his supporters turned to the Port Authority, an agency chartered in 1921 by the states of New York and New Jersey to build and operate any terminal or transportation facility within a 25-mile radius of the Statue of Liberty.
Port Authority is a hybrid creature, partly a government agency and partly operating as a private business. No one else had quite the same combination of deep pockets and financial resources, the right of eminent domain, and the technical engineering skills to launch a big project.
In this footage, a 2,000-pound laser-guided bomb is tested against a 4-foot-thick steel-reinforced concrete wall. The warhead is placed on a rocket-powered sled. The velocity at impact is 1,000 feet per second. As high-speed footage revealed. To be sure,
there's no trial here. There's no judicial determination. It's some bureaucrat or team of bureaucrats that says, we have determined that that guy is guilty of terrorism, therefore we have a right to kill him.
The person has been charged with, and they have all of the, not charged with, not indicted.
And he signs a death warrant.
He signs a death warrant.
Yes, our president has a hit list of American citizens like you targeted for assassination. And there are indications that the list of Americans targeted for assassination is growing.
Well, we all know that their definition of terrorism in every government, every dictatorial regime, inevitably starts going to the area of people who criticize what the government's doing.
I have two words for you: predator drones.
Arguing against it, arguing against the immorality. Ultimately, they start seeing those people as the enemy, people that need to be taken out. I mean, this power is the power that the Chinese communists wield, that the Soviet communists wielded, that they wield in Burma, North Korea. That's now a core feature of the U.S. government.
The State Department, we get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have as far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future.
Perhaps the saddest part of all is that once the people whose plight was exploited for the war propaganda have been used, abused, chewed up, and spit out by the war machine, they are completely forgotten about. How many of those same flag-waving propaganda repeaters that pretended to care about the Libyan people, for example, even know what is happening in the country now that the NATO bombs have stopped raining down and the corporate media is telling us to look elsewhere?
We filmed from our hotel balcony as two rival militia clashed. It turned into the worst fighting since the overthrow of Colonel Gaddafi. Libya's weak government has no control. The men with guns are a law unto themselves. The brigades who spearheaded the Libyan revolution now threaten to destroy it.
The simple truth is that the people who fight and die in these bloody wars of aggression are never the ones who benefit from the slaughter. For this reason, the combined resources of the State Department, the corporate media, and countless foundation-funded NGOs are required to sell these lies to an increasingly skeptical public. But now we stand at a crossroads of history, with the public, perhaps for the first time, able to instantly research and expose the propagandistic claims of the ruling establishment almost as soon as they are made. In some ways, the public is better positioned than ever to abandon that 19th century world of war pretexts that Kerry was referring to. Perhaps we can start by consigning politicians like Kerry, and all the other liars who have enabled countless slaughter, warfare, and bloodshed throughout the years, to the dustbin of history by simply refusing to believe their transparent lies. On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, while in Washington a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her, and her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet, employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This is the story of 9/11, brought to you by the media which told you the hard truths about
his hip could be seen to move violently forward.
And
they took the babies out of incubators.
And
mobile production facilities.
And
the rescue of Jessica Lynch.
If you have any questions about this story, you are a batshit paranoid tinfoil dog-abusing baby hater and will be reviled by everyone. If you love your country and or freedom, happiness, rainbows, rock and roll, puppy dogs, apple pie, and your grandma, you will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone. Ever. This has been a public service announcement by the Friends of the FBI, CIA, NSA, DIA, SEC, MSM, White House, NIST, and the 9/11 Commission. Because ignorance is strength.
Conspiracy bullshit. Come on, you're a more intelligent man than that. Come on. I mean, come on. Listen, there has never been a conspiracy in this country.
There it is. The plane went right through the other tower. To be sure.
Oh my goodness. We're looking at a live picture from Washington, and there is smoke pouring out of the Pentagon. It would appear that there has been another major explosion, this one in the nation's capital. This is coming at 9:43 Eastern Time. The president right now is on his way back from Florida. We've gone there for an educational event. In a brief remarks, he said this was an apparent terrorist attack on our country. We do have a couple of reports.
You were worried, especially when I was standing in front of the Pentagon that night, seeing one of our fortresses pried open by a missile airplane. Thinking about the number of people that probably died on the plane by a missile airplane.
Director, can you clarify us, please, on what you've been able to verify and document concerning the flight path of 77 into the Pentagon? Did it go over Washington, D.C. first? 7 into the Pentagon. Did it go over Washington, D.C. first? I really can't comment on what we have with regard to that particular flight.
Is that national origin of some, if not all, of the hijackers? What can you say at this point about the national origin?
I'm not prepared to comment on that.
high-speed footage reveals, the LGB's time-delayed fuse detonates the warhead 60 milliseconds after impact. Delayed fuse detonates the warhead 60 milliseconds after impact.
Nobody knew what to do. There was no clear thinking. People were just reacting to kind of save themselves.
And this is such you're in the same location when the building comes down.
I had been taken downstairs by Port Authority police who knew that I had this videotape. And we were moving actually to go back to the Trinity Church to make them a dub of the tape in a format that they could use on a VHS tape. And suddenly I heard one of the guys say, "Hey, Evan, watch out."
Hang on just a second. If you look in the upper, this now is frozen. And this is an angle of this attack that we have not seen before. At the top of the building on your left, out of the left, become the building, and watch how the aircraft penetrates the building. Go ahead. Completely in one side and out the other.
It just disappeared. It disappeared like a bad special effect. It just disappeared. It disappeared like a bad special effect.
Truth. Boy, the line dancing between what we can report on and what you can't report on is getting so dicey. So I'm not going to use any of these buzzwords, but just please take a look at the screens about what they're planning on. Here it is, more coming our way. They're just going to keep doing that. It's all part of the game for our lockdown that's happening faster and faster and faster. So it's going to continue. It's going to put more pressure on the educators. It's going to put more pressure on people to do something about it. And they're just going to keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And so it gets to the point where our freedoms are completely gone and everybody's going to wonder what happened. Well, we know what's happening. We are seeing what's happening, yet very few people are stepping up to the plate to do anything about it. It's all a bunch of lies, it's all a bunch of propaganda, and it's all a bunch of fear-mongering to take away what rights we have left. 9/11 began it with the anthrax scares right after that was made in Fort Dugaway in Salt Lake City, and then from Fort Detrick. And that was supposedly blamed on the Islamics, but it's found out that it was by the U.S. government that released the anthrax to get the Patriot Act reported, because Tom Daschle and Leahy, the senior Democrats at the time, would not agree with Cheney's 3,000 pages of the Patriot Act. And just read this, folks. I can't say anything about it because it may hit an logarithm or something, but read what that says. See how the game works? It's all a lie. Everything is a lie that they're being foisted on, but the public does have little critical dissemination. So we will, and we can.
It was a symbolic act more than a murderous act. The World Trade Center is a symbol, an icon, a representation, not just of the Port of New York and New Jersey, or of Lower Manhattan, or of Wall Street, but indeed of the capitalist system, and by extension, all of America.
One of the less remembered parts of the Osama bin Laden fairy tale was that the NSA had a hard time keeping track of his communications with his al-Qaeda operatives. Why? Because, as General Michael Hayden told CBS News back in early 2001, bin Laden used standard encryption and off-the-shelf American telecommunication products.
In the wake of the attacks, Osama bin Laden has emerged as the prime suspect. Bin Laden has long been one of NSA's main targets, but Hayden says he's a hard man to keep track of because he has access to the latest and best communications equipment made right here in the U.S. and available to anyone who can afford it.
I can't comment specifically on who's doing what, but I can say that people who would do harm to us are using encrypted products and services.
But I think people have a hard time understanding why, if during the Cold War, you could stay either even or a step ahead of the big bad Soviet Union with all of its might, why you can't stay a step ahead of Osama bin Laden.
Several reasons. One is the Soviet Union, for its telecommunications, had to rely on those things the Soviet Union built. Osama bin Laden has at his disposal the wealth of a $3 trillion a year telecommunications industry that he can rely on.
He has better technology?
That's one. He has better technology available to him. I can't get into operational details about what it is we know or don't know about him.
Requires more on your part, and you're behind the curve.
We're behind the curve in keeping up with the global telecommunications revolution. Yes, we are. And that's the challenge we have.
Sound unbelievable? That's because it is. As they go on to admit in that very same report, they were tracking bin Laden's satellite phone after all, and as James Bamford and others have described it in exhaustive detail, the NSA was monitoring al-Qaeda's communications hub in Yemen for years prior to 9/11, and purposefully withholding most of that information from the CIA bin Laden unit. But the idea that the NSA just wasn't able to track bin Laden because of his dastardly technology was a key meme for the NSA to implant in the immediate wake of 9/11. That's why the Hayden interview was replayed on CBS less than 48 hours after the attacks, and that's why, as recently declassified documents show, the NSA used 9/11 as an official talking point to justify their illegal surveillance of Americans. This meme, of course, was a lie. As NSA insiders have pointed out for years, most, if not all, of the current illegal collections programs began before 9/11, but the false flag events of September 11th provided the perfect justification for the revelation and expansion of those programs.
I would hear the following phrase, which I think one person in particular probably had regrets ever saying more publicly, that 9/11 was a gift to NSA. A gift.
It disappeared right into the building. I've seen it 6, 7 times now. It's still incomprehensible what is actually happening there.
In 1998, they debuted the 1st and 10 line on ESPN.
Until now, this marker was the only reference fans in the stadium and at home watching on TV had for the first down.
The key challenge in making the yellow line is that the scene is constantly changing, which means that the yellow line has to constantly change. Not only are there 3 different cameras used for wide shots of the field, each camera pans, tilts, and zooms to follow the action. So the first thing Sport Vision does before the game is create a 3D mathematical model of each football field using laser surveying tools. And during the game, they gather data from the cameras about their pan, tilt, and zoom positions for every single frame. So when the operator specifies that the first down is at the 43-yard line, for example, the computers combine the camera data with their own model of the field to draw the yellow line in the proper perspective, and to redraw it for every frame being broadcast to viewers. The final step is what makes the line kind of magical, and that's removing any part of the line that's obstructed by players, refs, or the ball so that the line looks like it's underneath them, almost painted on the field. The way the computers know which pixels to remove is by sampling the colors. Think of the field as a giant green screen, but anyone who has worked with green or blue screens knows that you need a really uniform and evenly lit background for it to work well. So Sport Vision identifies in advance which shades of green and brown are in the field given the lighting conditions of the day. Those are the colors to be covered by the yellow line, and they identify which colors are in the players' uniforms and should never be covered by yellow. It works amazingly well. The whole yellow line process delays the live broadcast by less than a second.
Deed of the capitalist system, and by extension, all of America.
To bank sharply and smash directly, perhaps purposefully, into, oh my goodness, oh God, there's another one. Oh my goodness, there's another one.
This seems to be on purpose.
Oh my goodness, now you, now it's obvious. Now it's a goodness, now you, now it's obvious, I think, that there's a second plane just crashed into the World Trade Center.
I did not see a plane go in. That just exploded.
I didn't see any airplane.
Did you see it? Yes, I saw it. It just blew up. A big explosion.
Everything I saw told me it was bombs in the building.
And then the South Tower just exploded.
The second building went off.
It just blew up.
No second flight. It was a bomb. Bomb in another building, not second flight.
I was underneath it. I was looking at the tower. I had my camera in my hand. I heard the noise. I never saw the airplane.
That's the bomb. Who say the second plane?
I never saw the airplane.
That's what we're told. The second plane. We saw it on television.
I never saw the airplane.
I did not see a plane.
I didn't see any airplane.
It blew up.
Oh, I didn't even know that was a plane. I learned that from the news media.
And we saw it on television. And we saw it on television. And we saw it on television.
So far, 22,000 tons of material have been brought from the
Ground Zero Center behind me and out to Staten Island to the Fresh Kills dump where it's all being examined. And one of the major developments that occurred overnight is that the officials found a passport belonging to one of the terrorists. That was apparently found a couple of blocks away because when one of the planes, or the first plane, slammed into the tower, you could see it on the video, in fact, debris flew out the other end. There's a belief that some of the cockpit just kept on going, and with that velocity went right through the building. Sources here on the ground had told me that they even found some body parts in the cockpit area. They believe that it is one of the terrorist bodies from the cockpit because the clothing does not match clothing of airline pilots.
And then there's evidence of the things being collected from the World Trade Center on the ground, which and you don't accept that again, do you?
His passport. Do you accept that? They are finding the passport beneath the towers before the collapse. So you think that the hijacker, flying at 960 miles per hour, tells his co-pilot a few seconds before impact, I just have to pull out my passport. He's rolling down the window, throwing out the passport, and it is accidentally just found on the sidewalks. Is that the story you accept? Or do you think that the passport survived the blast of the jet fuel and flew out through the flames and landed on the sidewalks? This is what you believe? Are you serious?
Yes.
You are? Okay.
I think, well, that's the official account. Is that not the official account?
Well, if you accept the official account, we disagree. I beg to differ.
But so the point is if evidence is presented to you.
Following phrase, which I think one person in particular probably had regrets ever saying more publicly, that 9/11 was a gift to NSA. A gift.
Now, over a decade later, that meme is paying off. Just 2 weeks after a federal district court judge ruled the NSA's collection of telephone metadata unconstitutional, a different district court judge ruled it constitutional. In his particularly florid ruling, U.S. District Court Judge William Pauley wrote, "The September 11th terrorist attacks revealed, in the starkest terms, just how dangerous and interconnected the world is. While Americans depended on technology for the convenience of modernity, Al-Qaeda plotted in a 7th century milieu to use that technology against us. It was a bold jujitsu, and it succeeded because conventional intelligence gathering could not detect diffuse filaments connecting Al-Qaeda." No matter if it bears any resemblance to reality, the meme has been planted and the courts are going along with it. It is now official lore that the NSA needs to spy on everyone's phone metadata to prevent the next 9/11 from taking place. Of course, that's not the only lie in this story. The even bigger lie that is being propounded now is that the national conversation and the court cases are still revolving around the false notion that NSA phone spying is somehow limited to metadata, as if all the NSA is collecting are lists of phone numbers and call durations. We have suspected for years that phone calls were being recorded and stored wholesale, but that was actually confirmed by Tim Clemente, a former FBI counterterrorism agent who casually let it slip on Aaron Burnett's CNN program in May that U.S. intelligence agencies have access to complete phone conversations whenever they want in the name of national security.
Now, obviously it was a voicemail. They could try to get the phone companies to give that up at this point. But if it's not a voicemail, it's just a conversation. There's no way they actually can find out what happened, right? Unless she tells them.
No, there is a way. We certainly have ways in national security investigations to find out exactly what was said in that conversation. It's not necessarily something that the FBI is going to want to present in court, but it may help lead the investigation and or lead to questioning of her.
So somewhere
we can
it's
certainly
being
find
digitized, or they can actually get that. Because people were saying, look, that wouldn't be possible. It's pretty incredible what you're saying.
No, welcome to America. All of that stuff is being captured as we speak, whether we know it or like it or not.
Although this caused a buzz at the time and was picked up by numerous publications, it was soon covered over by the Snowden story, which once again focused people's attention on metadata. One person who did not gloss over it, however, was Russ Tice. He is a former NSA employee who became a whistleblower almost a decade ago as one of the sources for the initial New York Times story exposing the illegal NSA wiretapping program. When he heard Clemente's interview, he immediately contacted his ex-NSA friends and discussed whether the NSA was already recording every phone conversation they could intercept and storing them at their new Utah data center. The ex-NSA gathering's consensus? This was exactly what the NSA was doing. As a result, Tice decided to go further than ever before about what he knew regarding illegal NSA activities. In a series of interviews on BoilingFrogsPost.com, The Corbett Report, and other media venues, Tice revealed that during his time as an NSA employee, he had personally handled the eavesdropping orders to monitor the communications of high-ranking judges, congressmen, and military officials, presumably for the purposes of blackmail.
Initially what I saw was they were targeting news organizations, they were targeting U.S. companies that did international business, they were looking at financial institutions, but they were also going after the State Department and Secretary of State Colin Powell at the time, and they were going after high-ranking military generals, and that was just with my space capabilities that I saw. Now later, when I got together with colleagues, and we started to put together the terrestrial side, that's the side that is being done with all those nodes all over the country with the fiber optics and that sort of thing, then we found out that it got much worse because, and this was just the phone that we were looking at, but it was also being done at the email level, but that wasn't the information I was getting. The information I was seeing were phone numbers that were being plugged into a system that was going after people's phone numbers and associated numbers, and a lot of numbers I wasn't even sure, but they went after law firms and lawyers. They went after more generals. General Petraeus was one of the guys. It seemed like right about that 3-star level was they were going after admirals and generals. They went after the Supreme Court, of which I held Judge Alito's paperwork in my hand, numbers associated with Judge Alito that someone had put into the system that NSA used to spy on Judge Alito.
And let's just break this down a little bit, because these are explosive allegations right now that I have not heard anyone talk about before, that there are actually orders that you personally saw in your hands to wiretap Judge Alito, high-ranking intelligence officers, David Petraeus, Barack Obama.
Wannabe Senator Barack Obama. At that time, he wasn't even a senator. He had won his primary in Illinois, and I think maybe the catalyst, and I'm not sure, was the fact that he had just done a big speech at the Democratic convention. Now, I was at that time a lifelong Republican. I didn't even watch the Democratic convention. So at the time, the significance of it really didn't hit me until later. I mean, I did look up, well, who's this guy Barack Obama? Well, okay, he made a speech, blah, blah, blah. But then, of course, later, things, started to, come into play that this is our future president of the United States.
And once again, these shocking revelations are being spun away into theory and hearsay. This time it's Senator Bernie Sanders lobbing the softball at the NSA as he sends them a letter politely asking whether the NSA is spying on Congress. Senator Sanders did not ask about the wiretapping of communications that Tice has already exposed, however, but merely whether or not the NSA metadata spying extends to members of Congress. Once again, the real scandal is papered over by milquetoast non-confrontation by the bought and paid for Congress that have been perfectly content to let this happen for years now. The entire NSA fiasco is stage-managed theatrics from start to finish, a carefully choreographed stage show with full cooperation from the corporate media that is only too willing to play along and misdirect the national conversation to areas of little or no importance. Meanwhile, in reality, the only question worth discussing is how to abolish the NSA entirely. Since this is not a question that is on the table politically, it is up to the public to find alternative ways of shutting down the NSA. Luckily, there is at least one innovative project happening that proposes to do just that.
Fact. The new NSA data center in Utah requires 1.7 million gallons of water every single day to operate. Billions of Fourth Amendment violations need massive computers and the water to cool them. That water is being supplied by the state of Utah. Fact. There's absolutely nothing in the Constitution which requires your state to help the feds violate your rights. Our message to Utah: turn it off.
Well, in the broadest sense, the Off Now campaign is a state and local initiative to push back against NSA spying. We do not have any faith in Congress or the president or the federal courts to actually do anything to rein in the NSA spy machine. They may pretend like they do. They may pass some bills, but they're not really going to do anything that's going to be of any use. So we've decided we need to take a different approach. We want to harness the power of our state and local governments to create obstructions and make it as difficult as we can for the NSA to continue this unconstitutional and immoral spying on virtually everybody in the world. And so one of the main aspects of the campaign, probably the central aspect right now, is the Fourth Amendment Protection Act. And it's a piece of legislation that we are introducing at the state level. And essentially it does four things. I'll run through them really quick in a bullet-pointed way to make things easy to understand. The first thing it does is it denies material support from the state to the NSA. So essentially anything that the NSA gets from the state, they won't get it anymore. And this could be very significant in some places. For instance, Utah, they use 1.7 million gallons of water a day to cool their spy computers in the Bluffdale data center. That water is actually supplied by a utility that's owned by the city of Bluffdale, which is a subdivision of the state of Utah. With this bill, it will make it possible to take steps to turn that water off and force the NSA to find water someplace else. So this can be extremely significant in states that actually have NSA facilities. We'd also deal with public utilities that supply electricity and things that we probably haven't even imagined yet. The second thing it does, and I really think this is the most significant part of the bill, at least in the short term, is that it prohibits any data that has been gathered by the NSA without a warrant that is shared with state and local law enforcement. It makes it inadmissible in state courts. We know that the NSA is sharing this data. We know that very little of it actually has anything to do with quote unquote national security. It's for basic law enforcement purposes. So this would basically say, you can share this data all you want to, but it's going to be useless to state and local law enforcement in court, and it will kind of take that dagger out of the heart of the.
And all of a sudden, down there, I see this van parked, and I see three guys on top of the van, and I could see that they were like happy. You know, they didn't look shocked to me.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event. Our purpose was to document the event.
Building's going to collapse. Nothing information.
Okay. Hey, Israel did 9/11, all right?
9/11, the worst terrorist attack in our history, was planned and directed from Afghanistan.
They're thinking about bringing the building down. They didn't say what building, they just said bringing a building down. Last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1, and he was just saying, just run for your life, just run for your life. And then it was like another 2, 3 seconds, you heard explosions. Like, boom!
Oh, you want to call your mother or something? Don't worry about me.
This was a boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something.
He said after the recent attacks which the U.S. has witnessed, the U.S. government ventured to point fingers at me, accused me of involvement. The U.S. government has consistently blamed me for being behind every occasion its enemies attack it. I would like to assure the world that I did not plan the recent attacks, which seems to have been planned by people for personal reasons.
On infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
Investigation by USA Today raises some serious questions about the FBI and how they track mass murders. What they found was troubling. 2 of the most infamous mass killings in recent U.S. history weren't even recorded on the books. The FBI database is supposed to track all homicides across the country, but not one of the 26 people killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School made the list. Also, none of the 12 people killed in a Colorado movie theater made the list.
supposedly killed in the 2012 event were spotted alive and well at the 2013 Super Bowl. These kids would not be identified by the NFL or anyone putting on this show.
The government encouraged the manufacture and importation of military firearms for the criminals to use. This is intended to foster a feeling of insecurity, which would lead the American people to voluntarily disarm themselves by passing laws against firearms. Using drugs and hypnosis on mental patients in a process called Orion, the CIA inculcated the desire in these people to open fire on schoolyards and thus inflame the anti-gun lobby. This plan is well underway and so far is working perfectly. The middle class is begging the government to do away with the Second Amendment.
Well,
Obviously, it's a company that specializes in staged crisis events. Let's look at the About section. Our specially trained professional role-play actors and internationally accredited film crews bring realistic, informed crisis management and disaster incidents to life. We are able to use crisis events. We rehearse and deliver highly credible, immersive crisis events which we can film and supply as interactive training tools. Let's scroll down here. These are some of the main positions that run the show. Emergency Services Advisor, Behavioral Psychologist, Production Manager, Cohort Wrangler, aka the Handler. So come on over to this website and have a look around. It has everything you need for a staged event like we're witnessing in Orlando. I'm not saying this is the company, but it's a company just like it, guaranteed. Let's go back to the Home tab and scroll down. Clients and Associates. What's this? G4S? Isn't that the company Omar Mateen works for? Oh yeah, it is. So now we have a huge connection to a crisis acting company. These things are out there, people. Look, here's another one. Flashpoint reality-based training. And another, Magnum Services, Casualty Simulation Specialists. Look at that logo. So yeah, another piece of the puzzle. This whole thing has just been ripped apart. 100% fake bullshit. Do not fall for this. This is exactly what they want. For you to be upset, sad, and in fear. I'm trying to help you. Call me retarded all you want. It doesn't affect me. Just wake up already. Before I get out of here, let's look at this article online that confirms that Omar Mateen is also an actor.
Minutes after the fourth plane had crashed in Pennsylvania, news was already circulating that several passengers had made calls with their cell phones from the hijacked airplanes.
We are being hijacked. We are being hijacked. Those frightening words were uttered by a passenger aboard United Flight 93 who was able to call emergency personnel on his cell phone.
Japanese television decided to take matters into their own hands. In 2003, they conducted an on-camera experiment near Ontario, Canada, to verify the actual reach of cell phones from different altitudes.
The cellular phone system used in the experiment in Canada is the one used in the United States. 3 cell phones, each from different telephone companies, were used. And when the aircraft rose to 6,000 feet, Company A's phone also became useless. At 8,000 feet, none of the 3 cell phones worked anymore.
No service on A, no service on B, no service on C.
In other words, at an altitude of 35,000 feet, cell phones would have been totally useless.
Waking up out of her sleep, and she just saying, "Babe, listen." And I'm like, "I'm listening." And she said, "My plane has been hijacked." And I said, "Stop playing," because I'm just waking up. You thinking that she's, but she ain't never, she said, "I never played with you like that." She said, "Listen to me. And I heard the fear in her voice. I heard the fear. I heard the desperation in her voice to get out what she had to say. So at that point, I stopped. I said, "Okay, well, let's pray." So we prayed. And then she told me that, she said, "Well, we're getting ready to go to the cockpit." And I'm like, I'm trying to figure out what she's saying. I hear people in the background screaming, and I hear some bamming. And she said, "Okay, it's getting ready to happen. It's getting ready to happen." And then we got disconnected. And then that was the last time I spoke to her. Then once the phone got disconnected, then I sat up in the bed because I did all this laying down. I sat up in the bed like.
Okay, so you've alarmed the washroom metal detector, so we have to provide some additional security. Okay. Have you wait right here for a second. Okay, sir, right in here. I see you've got some electronics on, so go ahead and take the electronics off real quick. We're going to get those items run through the X-ray in just a minute, okay? Okay, lay that right there. We're going to run that through X-ray here momentarily. Okay, sir. Now, you've been sent to me for some additional screening. My name's Officer Hewitt. I'm going to provide a pat-down for you, okay, using the front of my hands on the closed parts of your body. When I come to a sensitive hand like the buttocks, I'll be using the back of my hands like that. When I come to the sensitive area in the front, the groin area, I'll be going down in a motion like that, and then across like that, this way. When it comes to the legs, I'm going to place one hand on your hip, one on your inner upper thigh, go up to meet resistance, and then go down. I'll be doing that 2 times in the back, 2 times in the front. I see you got your belt on. Go ahead and take your belt off for me, and we're going to have you take your shoes off too, sir. Okay, all performance. Okay, going to have you place your arms out, palms up to your side. Do you have a watch on today? I do not. Turn the palms up this way, facing the ceiling, sir. Okay. Okay, sir, go ahead, tip your head back. You're going to start back on top of your head there. Okay, then so I'm going to check your balls out here. Okay. I'm going to raise the ball back. Okay, sir, put your shoulder, back underneath, all the way up, across the top of the back, sit on the side. So I'm going to go on the back and say, left down, lower, and up on the okay, so now I'm going to go over these head arms, over into the bottom pockets. Okay, now I'm going to throw the waistband back here, okay? Just like this, all the way around. See what I'm saying? And then behind the waistband, just like this. Sir, okay, what I need you to do now, sir, I need you to go ahead and grab your belt loops, hike those pants up as tight as they'll go, right? Okay. I'm going to pat you down the buttocks there using the back of my hands from seam to seam, hold them up right there, sir. Just like this, all the way down. Now, sir, I'm going to take one hand on the hip, one on the inner upper thigh, go up to meet resistance, and all the way down to the bottom. Same on this side, sir. Okay, sir.
When her dad objected to the pat-down, listen to what a TSA agent told him.
Guess what? We don't live in a make-sense world.
Reaction is mixed.
You have young daughters. I mean, how would you feel if you saw that?
You know what? I think I would be okay with it because I'd rather it be err on the side of caution.
If it's to protect our kids, I'm all for it.
Fire department was sitting here all morning. Yeah, they sitting right there. I was wondering what they doing. And I said, where's the fire department just sitting there? That's what I'm thinking. Is it a conspiracy?
No, it wasn't in the commercial airline. That second one wasn't no commercial. No, second one definitely. The first one I never saw. The second one I saw was big, but it didn't have any markings on it that I saw. No, I didn't see any. The second one, it didn't have, like no camouflage or anything. No emblems, no logos.
I mean, it was moving so unbelievably fast. The last thing I saw before the second attack was the silver underside of the plane before it went into the building.
It was a military plane.
And it didn't look like a commercial jet.
Could be a drone aircraft. That's an aircraft that's guided electronically to its target without having a pilot.
Did you actually see the jet itself?
Yeah.
And what type was it?
It was gray, to be honest with you. It was gray. It was it was like a 737.
They thought it was a fighter jet coming in to cover the city.
We've heard reports of secondary explosions after the aircraft impacted, whether in fact there wasn't something else at the base of the towers.
And the lobby looked as though a bomb had exploded there. All the glass was taken out. There were 10-foot by 10-foot marble panels that were walls. Several people with their hair singed, skin hanging off.
And at that time, we heard a huge explosion. What I feared, I never in a million years feared those buildings coming down. Never. I did fear secondary explosion, or possibly a second plane. 30th floor. We hear another explosion.
I really thought it was maybe the end of the world. There was going to be more planes coming in. There was going to be bombs going off. I didn't know, to what degree they really just had us surrounded.
From World Trade Center, we took a hit on that last explosion. The man supposed to be evacuated this time.
He's dead?
It exploded and all just blew us all in. fire department's happened? Hold that. There's no pulse, nothing.
The third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
What was it like? What was it like?
Horrible.
It's like
horrible.
hell. You don't want to know.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Is that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the
Yeah, definitely secondary explosion. Because we was inside waiting to go upstairs, and on the way upstairs, the whole fucking plane blew. And we just collapsed on everybody inside the lobby.
Similar to the first tower coming down, secondary?
I don't know about the first one, but I know the second one was terrible. Then there was a third one too after that one. You're in the building trying to help people, and it's exploding on the inside the building. So I don't think we're getting any worse than this.
big boom. Come down the steps, everything fine until we got to the basement, and then everything just fell in. I got trapped in there with another guy, crawled out, kept getting hit in the head, had bags sold around. Finally, we fought our way out over the rubble.
Yeah.
Come on, Doc.
You did all right. All right, way to be, Tom. Let's go.
This was clearly, the way the structure is collapsing, this was the result of something that was planned. This is not, it's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way. How they accomplished this, we don't know.
The president said that Osama bin Laden was the prime suspect. Why? There's just a lot of evidence.
Oh, the reason I keep insisting that there was a relationship between Iraq and Saddam and Al-Qaeda, because there was a relationship.
2/3 of Americans say it's not worth fighting. So?
Nearly 3,000 people died at the World Trade Center on 9/11, but the list of victims keeps growing. 70,000 men and women worked at the ruins at Ground Zero. Many now suffer from illnesses officially linked to the toxic smoke and dust, including respiratory and gastric diseases.
We all heard in the beginning, the air was good, it's okay.
Yeah.
Now that very same government's saying, well, cancer's not part of it.
3 New York City firefighters died of cancer on the same day this week.
More than 850 firefighters and emergency workers have developed cancer because of their work at Ground Zero. 99% of all firefighters and emergency workers have reported at least one respiratory problem.
Of evil. You know, when you think about, okay, there's a war going on. It is a spiritual war, and it is good versus evil. But those who are leaving these shit-ass comments are part of the evil. And the good who do nothing. Sorry, you're on the evil side. Because all it takes for evil to flourish is for an awful lot of good people to sit around and do nothing. And boy, do you contribute nicely. You contribute to the nightmare that we live. Think about what you're writing, guys. Always think about what you're writing. But, you know, I'm not talking to the majority of my subscribers who leave wonderful comments, comments filled with information that educates people, comments that are supportive and loving and caring. But then you get these people who you begin to, and also if you don't post videos, then you don't realize how many comments you get from, you know, this crowd of, they consider themselves awake. But when you see this over and over and over again, you realize what we're up against. You realize that these people destroy trust. They have no clue what they're saying. That they, what? I don't even know how it is I'm a shill from that video that I posted in another emergency alert, and how it is that I could be a Russian agent because I posted that video. And And clearly, she's pointing to North America. Okay. When you get to see the awake crowd, when you've met a lot, when you've posted and get these comments, you get to see what we're up against. Forget about the sleeping sheeple that, yes, we absolutely need to wake up. But we don't even have a healthy, awake crowd. They just lash out at any little thing. You're a shill, you're a disinformation agent, you're this, you're that. And they don't understand that they are absolutely helping. You're a useful idiot. Yeah. Yeah, you get really tired. You get really tired.
The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade.
The evidence presented may cause the viewer to experience a permanent change in their perception of the world around them.
Someone forgot to tell everyone that what you see on TV isn't real. Now, I'm not just talking about the shows that call themselves reality TV. I'm talking about everything, including your nightly news.
Are you aware of testimony of bombs in the building before the building collapsed, sir? Larry Silverstein was told not to come into work. That's why him, his daughter, and his son never showed up to work on 9/11. Reporters, do your job. Please ask some questions.
News media. I said, we're going to war with Iraq. Why? He said, I don't know. He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. He said, I just got this down from upstairs. And he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
It was always going to be whenever there was an incident.
How is it possible that anybody with any kind of sanity would consider the United States or Britain or the West in general to be in any kind of position to be punishing anyone for any illegality? If we want to take a look at Iraq, there is at least 1 million, probably even close to 2 million dead. We invaded that country, destroyed it, created millions of orphans, millions of refugees. Let's go back to Vietnam, where we dropped 20 million bombs, more than all of World War II combined. We have destroyed so many countries. Who in the hell in their right mind would consider the United States or the West in general to be in any position to punish anybody? Never mind the obvious facts that this is a false flag attack and a long list of false flag attacks, which let's get into that, please.
If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. So what a responsibility you all have to tell the truth, not just to be first, but to tell the truth. We live in a society now where it's just first. Who cares? Get it out there. We don't care who it hurts. We don't care who we destroy. We don't care if it's true.
You only got 2 kids. Can you just keep it to 2 rooms? I mean, you, the guy, you know, you, the mechanic, wherever, you. I mean, you need to do something. And my music, and a lot of music, it's only talking about the suppressed rising. I mean, the oppressed rising up against the oppressor. That's all. That's what my music's about. But I didn't think they was gonna take it this serious. Me keep talking out. I didn't think it was gonna be.
What's going down with the industry, dog?
The industry is full of a bunch of dick-sucking, dick-riding, bending over the desk ass niggas, straight up like that.
All our society is run by insane people. If anybody can put on paper what our government and the American government, etc., and the Russian, Chinese, what they are actually trying to do.
But there's a reason. There's a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks. And it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The big, wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. Politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. You know something? They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back, so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later, because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
We got into the habit of buying junk foods that have no actual food in them. We buy gallons of poisonous household cleaners when one degradable soft soap will do. We are poisoning our homes.
In my line of work, you got to keep repeating things over and over and over again for the truth to sink in, to kind of catapult the propaganda.
Because you do know, folks, living in this country, you're bound to know that every time you're exposed to advertising, you realize once again that America's leading industry, America's most profitable business, is still the manufacture, packaging, distribution, and marketing of bullshit. High quality, grade A, prime cut, pure American bullshit. And the sad part is that most people seem to have been indoctrinated to believe that bullshit only comes from certain places, certain sources. Advertising, politics, salesmen. Not true. Bullshit is everywhere.
Total power in one person's hand, not the other way. These damn bills are coming after all the damn time. Come out here and laugh. I gotta try to figure out how to vote for my people. Let my people go.
Bullshit is rampant. Parents are full of shit, teachers are full of shit, clergymen are full of shit, and law enforcement people are full of shit. This entire country is...
I went to this huge epiphany in 2012. This was right as all this crisis happened, when I gave up Collapse Now. People like me and Guy McPherson and Dmitry Orlov, many of us who have walked this path for a long time, we all realized that in 2012 that by Cartesian analysis, we had encountered a number of problems that it was not possible to solve. Okay? Now it's become that much more in our faces. And if I'm happier now, it's because, shit, I've been walking the walk I've been walking for 35 years, being called an idiot, you know, being attacked, threats on my life, being discounted, being a faithful scout who brought the reports back. And over time, my reports have been found to be honorable and true. I'm a scout for all two-leggeds. Two-leggeds meaning native reference for all human beings. My scouting reports have been good. That's why you're here talking to me now. I'm enjoying this not just because I'm tripping on its exciting times and I'm getting off on the world ending. It's like I'm so not alone anymore. I was one of the first, man. The scout walks alone. It's the loneliest walk of all, and that's why it's respected. That's why it's hardest. I didn't know this until I met my Indian teacher. That's why the scout's knife is sharp on both edges. This is the scout's knife because it cuts your life to go out into the world of the enemy and see what they are and who they are and how they live and how they operate, and to experience the belly of the beast. You got to bring back a good scouting report. You got to do it with honor. But once you get to the belly of the beast, you have to make your way back to the light, to balance. And the scout walks alone. It's hard. Am I beautiful, Desiree? You have to tell me. But yeah, Kit Carson's probably 4 or 5 miles away, as the crow flies, as the eagle flies.